everyone. We are ready for a CCO Club webinar. We're at number 101. I love the topic tonight, and we're going to give you a glimpse into our teaching style and some of the content that we teach. Specifically, tonight we'll be talking about ICD-10-PCS. It's going to be kind of a tutorial, and we're focusing on beginners. If PCS is new to you, then this is the perfect video for you. And I'm looking forward to introducing it to you because it's one of my favorite code sets. Now, I love diagnosis coding. PCS is not diagnosis coding. It is, in fact, the procedural part of the code sets. This is the inpatient procedural code sets. And a little tip, by the way, guys, I predict ICD-10-PCS will eventually take away CPT from that's produced by the AMA. I just see it happen because it is a fabulous code set. And once you learn how to use it, it is extremely easy to use and versatile. So that right there is the first heads up. ICD-10 PCS stands for International Classification of Diseases 10th Revision procedure coding system, and it actually replaced ICD 9, if volume 3. Now, some of you have been coding for a while, but maybe you have not been involved with inpatient coding, and so you weren't familiar with volume 3 in ICD 9. You knew it was there because it was in the coding manual, but you didn't play with it too much. You were just aware of it because that wasn't the arena that you were working in. Well, what PCS did when ICD 10 came about, they separated the two code sets into another manual. So now we have ICD 10 CM, which is our diagnoses for everything. Then we have our CPT manual, which is produced by the AMA exclusively, and that is the procedures for outpatient. And then ICD-10 PCS is the procedure code set for inpatient coding, but it can be used for outpatient. Now, just a little tip. CPT, of course, has E&M uh, codes and some other things that aren't built into PCS, but heads up on it's easy to add that content. And so I foresee that happening in the near future, maybe within the next 5 years. So it would really behoove you to get a understanding of ICD-10 PCS, feel comfortable with it. You don't have to become an expert. You don't even have to use it all the time. Maybe you're not inpatient. However, you want to be aware, get ahead of the game, because it is a code set that I believe will be used in the outpatient setting in the future. Again, inpatient is what it's used for now, and it's produced by CMS, which is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So that's one of the major power players with our code sets is CMS. Remember I said CPT, that's produced and developed by the AMA, the American Medical Association. So a different entity, both major players within the arena that we work. So there's a few things that I felt you really need to know about PCS. And from here on out, I'll just refer to it as PCS because ICD-10 is PCS is a mouthful. So whenever I see PCS, you will know that I am referring to the code set. This is directly from the content that we teach in our course. Some of the main points about the code set that is important for you to understand. Again, we are going to just highlight that today and give you a peek into our course and how we teach. So for beginners, just kind of unpack PCS for you. My goal is to intrigue you, honestly, and hopefully you will come to love this code set as much as I do. One of the first things you should be aware of that you need to know is that this code set is actually a 7 character co- uh, code. Now, when we talk about uh, ICD-10-CM, we know how many characters that we can get into that code set, and that the characters start with the alphabet. There is its alphanumeric. Well, this is a code set that's alphanumeric also. However, the first character isn't always from the alphabet. It could be a number, but we'll talk about that in a few slides. So think of it though as 7 characters, possibly to build out your code. You'll always use 7 characters regardless, unlike ICD-10-CM, where you may not. So, say you're coding for type 2 diabetes with a CKD type of manifestation, that would be E11.22, or type 2 diabetes without any complications, E11.9, or it might be something like prostate cancer, which is going to be just 3 characters, or you build into things that have laterality and further information. So it might be referring to one of the eyes, which always uses all the characters in ICD-10-CM. So with PCS, we will be building out the whole code. However, some of those answers to the codes that are available, the characters that are available, maybe no, that it isn't applicable, and there's always a character put in there. It's a Z. I'll show you that in a moment. So each character contains up to 34 possible values. I think the best way to describe PCS is that, it's multi-axial, but think of those little wooden blocks that you used to get when you were children. And now sometimes people still use those, and I love to see them decorated. If you collect them, you can spell out people in your name, your family's names with those blocks, and you can turn them and stuff. It's just a cute thing to do. But think of each one of the spaces that are available in the 7 characters is a block, and that block turns, it's multi-axial, will turn to whatever values applicable that you need to build the code set. Now, there is 10 digits, O through 9, and 24 letters, which is A through H and J through N and P through Z. Now, you can use any of those characters when they're applicable, when they're defining their description. However, that's not something you really have to have memorized. You All that information will be given to you, and if you work in PCS and you're doing procedures that are repetitious and everything, that'll fall into place. So don't be alarmed when I tell you that, hey, there is all of these characters that you're going to use when you first start playing with them and building out that code. It can be a little anxiety causing. Again, once you get the hang of it, super easy to use. They do not use the letter O and I. And the reason they don't is because they are too similar to the number 0 and the number 1. Okay, so they just decided not to use those. Now, so whenever you see a 0, it is actually a 0 and not the letter O. And whenever you see what looks like an I, it's actually a 1. Okay, keep that in mind. The diagnostic information is not going to be included in the description of procedures. That is just something to keep in mind. And the index contains a list of 3 to 4 characters so that when you go, and we'll practice the index, when you go to look up a code in the index, just like you do with CPT and you do with ICD-10-CM, it's going to give you a reference to go in and find that code. Well, index works the same way with PCS, except instead of it giving you like a definition, it's going to give you the first 3 to 4 characters, and then you'll be able to go into the body of tables. And so think of it as the tabular section of the manual, where it has the descriptions and where you're building the code. So it kind of gets you to that point, and then you can build out the rest of the code based on the tables that are on the page that you go to. Again, when you get your PCS manual and you start playing with it a little bit, you're going to first think, oh my, this is so much more different than anything that you've been exposed to yet. However, once you get the hang of it, it's actually much faster and easier to use than the CPT manual. So again, I can't give it enough praise. I know I'm talking about it, hyping it up and everything, but again, my goal is to make sure that you fall in love with it like me. So for beginners in PCS, a few more things that I wanted to make sure that you were aware of, and this is directly from the coding textbook that we use, uh, a few statements. And I'll just go ahead and read these so that I can impress upon you and not go off on a tangent and confuse you. A code is going to be derived by choosing a specific value for each of the 7 characters. That's where you get into that block placing. You'll pick up a block for the first character, and there'll be so many options that you'll be able to choose from. The values typically specify the section, body system, root operation, body part, approach device, and qualifier. Now, some of those terms may feel a little alien to you, but I'm going to give you examples, and once I do, you'll have it. It's not difficult to get familiar with those terms. The same letter or number placed in a different position in the code has a different meaning. Now, when we look at ICD-10-CM, we know that certain characters mean the same thing predominantly through the whole code set. For example, I talked about diabetes. We know that all of your diabetic codes start with an E. And we can remember that by endocrine system, right? So the first character will represent that whole section. And that's somewhat true about the first character with PCS. However, think about the character 8 and 9 in CM. So 8s in ICD-10 CM predominantly will refer to uh, other. And so if you person had an other type of disease that it's defining, then that would represent the provider knows what it is. He's defined it, but it's not in the code set. There's not a code available. So they use an 8 after the decimal to indicate that. Nines are predominantly used to define unspecified. Not 100% of the time, but almost always. If you see that 9 after the decimal, it's going to indicate that either the provider doesn't know yet, it's unspecified because they need to do more diagnostic testing, or the provider just didn't give the information in their documentation. And again, that's not 100%, but it's a pretty close reference. Like 80% of the time you can rely on that. It's not going to be the way in PCS. So if you see a character 8, it could mean multiple things, but it's based on the previous character. So the previous character works through a table system. And once you go to that table, then you kind of have a drop down and you choose what's applicable to the code, the character before it. So that's why they will be different. The first thing that you want to familiarize yourself with in the code set is the first character. Oh, I would say 75% of the time you'll be working in med surge, medical surgical codes, because that's where most procedures are done. And that character is going to be a 0. Now, note that um, all of these sections, which the first character is called the section that we're dealing in, think of that as in ICD-10-CM, the E is the endocrine section. Eyes are, most things to do with ischemia or the heart, right? It does that same thought process with procedures, except for the 0 is medical surgical. Any procedures for obstetrics will start with a 1. If we're doing a placement, it'll be a 2. Administration of something 3, measurement monitoring 4, extracorporeal assistance and performance 5, therapies 6, osteopathic 7, 8 is other procedures. Isn't that interesting that I told you an 8 is used in CM like that? Aw. And then we still have others to go through. Chiropractic is a 9. Then we moved into characters that are alphabetic. So if we are dealing with imaging, so chest x-ray, CT scans, and so on, that procedure code will start with a section B. Nuclear medicine would be a C. That might be PET scans that are being done. Radiation therapy is a D. If we're doing rehab, whether it's physical rehabilitation or diagnostic audiology, that will start with an F. Mental health is a G, and you could remember that by you want to feel good, right? Substance abuse treatment is H, new technology is X, and that concludes the sections. And so that the first code is called the section. Now, real quick, I wanted to tell you how important it is to know the root operations. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on that because actually we have done extensive education on root operations previously. You can find that on our YouTube channel. If you're part of our club, you could see that. And we really blow this out of the water in our course because to me, in my opinion, the hardest part of putting together a PCS code is understanding the root operation, which is the third character. So I'm going to highlight it, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that because you'll be able to use this as a launching point to go out to our course and find or our other media, YouTube and stuff, and get more information. But again, make a note for yourself. PCS, root operations, that's going to be out of the whole code set, probably what you will want to invest most of your time in understanding. It will give you some, maybe a little pain around the corners there as you learn that, because the root operation terms are not defined like CPT terms. They are different. They use the same term, but their description or definition is different sometimes. It actually follows the thought process within the procedure and how the providers actually do the procedures. So again, it is a little different and we do invest a lot of time in educating you on that so that you feel comfortable when you go to test. The two examples that I gave for you is excision and resection. Now, this is why the root operations can get confusing. If we are going to do an excision, that procedure, it is defined as cutting out or off without replacement some of a body part, like a breast lumpectomy. And then a resection would be very similar, cutting out or off without replacement of all of a body part. So when you take our course, we have you underline or highlight some and all, because that's the difference. Notice the description is the same thing except for that term. And then the example of a resection would be a total mastectomy. So you can see how that would get confusing. Your patient comes in and has a lumpectomy. Well, they're actually doing an excision. Okay, so it'll say a lumpectomy, and sometimes they will use that term mastectomy in when they're describing it, or uh, providers will throw that term when actually it's a lumpectomy. They're not taking all of the breast, they're taking a part or a portion. And then the resection is they're taking all of the breast. Okay. See how that can be a little confusing? There's some other terms out there that are similar. Let's do a little practice. What about finding in the index the code for um, an open excision of the median nerve? So the main term that we're going to look up in the index, and then we need to know the modifying term and then the code. So what are we actually doing? We're doing an excision. Now, we remember what the excision means. And then the modifying term is nerve. Then, so we're going to look up excision, then we're going to look up nerve. What nerve are we dealing with? Because we got nerves all over the body. The median nerve. Again, might want to take a pause here. Whenever we're dealing with the code sets, it is very important to know your anatomy and physiology. So when a person comes to us and they're thinking about getting into this as a career path, the coding and the billing in this arena, we will ask them about their knowledge of anatomy and physiology. You may have taken courses in the past, and that may be golden for you. You may be good to go. However, if you aren't comfortable, if you don't have a background in the medical field, then it would be very important to take an anatomy physiology course. And we do have that available for you to build up your knowledge base, because, again, you need to know where the median nerve is, and you need to be aware of the names of the different nerves in the body. It will save you time, and it'll make you a more accurate coder. So from the information that we have now, we know that it will give us probably the first four characters, O1, 0, 1B, and maybe even 5. Okay, and then you will go to that area in the tables, and then it'll allow you to use the table to come up with the OZZ. And I'll explain what those are here in just a minute. So that nerve, the median nerve, is going to be that component that is going to define where you go into. I call it the tabular, but it's not really the tabular, it's the area of tables. But again, I love ICD-10-CM, so I just use it as a reference like a tabular. But if you say that, someone might look at you and say, well, that's not the tabular section because PCS doesn't have a tabular section. Well, again, you can say, yeah, I guess you could blame that on me. Now, we mentioned a mastectomy earlier. So how would it look for PCS if we wanted to come up with the code for a right total mastectomy? That would be one of the procedures that you might come across. So this is a definition of each of the 7 characters. So let's talk about them briefly. Again, I'm just giving you a little heads up of how we teach this, and how important it is to understand each area of the code set. So the section, med surge, the most often used is going to be 0. So we know that we have 7 boxes here. The first section would be med surge 0. And then we need to know what body system are we dealing with. And you think to yourself, well, a mastectomy isn't that would be the breast. Isn't that gynecological, right? But no, it's actually not. It's the skin. It's classified under skin. And that's how all of the code sets refer to it. So it would be skin. And then under skin, it would say skin and breast, actually, is that section. And that is H. The root operation, the key to the procedure. This defines the procedure. What are we doing to the patient? We're doing a resection. And remember, I gave you a little heads up the difference between an excision and a resection because we're going to remove all of a body part, right? The total breast on one side. So that is a T. Are all resections in PCS a T? No. So don't let that confuse you because remember in the beginning, I gave you a heads up that some of the characters will mean will have different definitions in different parts. For example, the body part. What are we removing? What are we resecting? It's going to be a T again for right breast. Okay. And then we need to know what approach do we do in doing a resection of the right breast. Well, there is actually only one option. It's open because you can't remove the right breast totally via any other, endoscopically. We have to remove it open. And then are we using any devices, any specific devices like robotic arms and stuff like that? No. Is there any qualifier? And the qualifier will be I kind of think of qualifier as a modifier, but it's not that I explain it more in the course and how you can kind of think of what a qualifier is because it's important that you understand what each one of these boxes represent. So again, in the course, I explain more in depth device and qualifier. So the main area that you've got to get down that you might have a little bit of a learning curve is what section, and most of the time it's med surge when you're doing something to somebody. And then the third character is what actually, what procedure are you doing? And in this root operation, we're doing a resection. Then you kind of go back and say, oh, well, body part. Now you have to build this from left to right, right? So each code, the O, the 0, uh, will tell you what is available to you in body section. Okay. Think of obstetrics. Well, if you use one, the obstetric section, you're not going to have all of the options for body systems available to you in that table like you would in the 0 section because obstetrics just doesn't deal with eyeballs, right? They don't deal with certain body parts. So therefore, the body systems that you'll be dealing with is a much smaller list in obstetrics, which would be a 1 for the section, than the med surge section of 0. And I explain that more in depth in the course. Now, I found this graphic and I also gave you a resource, but of where I found it, mostly just to give them attribution because it's from a study and you have to pay to get into the study. But I did link it for you because I liked the way they did this. So, what if we wanted to do a code out for a pacemaker placement? A little bit different. So we're still in the section of medical surgical, right? But the body system this time is a 2 for heart and great vessels. The root operation, what are we doing when we put in a pacemaker? We're inserting something. So it would be an H. The body part is for a pacemaker, the ventricle left, which was L. And then the approach is percutaneous in this particular scenario. So that's a 3. And then we have the device. This time we actually have a device that we're putting into the body, and that is a cardiac lead pacemaker. So that's a J. And then the qualifier is a Z because there is no qualifier applicable to this. So our code, our PCS code is 02HL3JZ. Okay. Great example, I thought. Easy to see. That is the resources that I gave you. Again, you can reference those at any time. You can even just Google PCS and see what comes up, but you're not going to get a lot of interesting information. It would be better that you join our club, the cco.us/club, to get a better understanding of PCS. Maybe you just want to kind of get a feel for our teaching style and some of the information that we provide. This would be a great opportunity to do that. Or better yet, if you're thinking about taking the CIC credential, or the CCS, we can help you with that because we do have courses for those and ancillary courses to build up your skill set. We have the medical terminology and anatomy that I mentioned, pathophysiology. We also have pharmacology that you would find beneficial if you're going to do the inpatient or even risk adjustment, which is another passion of mine. I appreciate you guys joining us. And if you have any questions, you let us know. We're easy to find. Just go to cco.us. And don't forget, we have a fabulous club where we mingle and talk and pick each other's brains and offer assistance in doing research on questions that you might have, as well as helping our students along. And again, that's cco.us/club. Thank you guys for joining us. I'll see you next time.
Our online ICD-10-PCS course was created specifically for beginners to learn everything they need about PCS procedural coding. The course includes a personal coach, 9 months of access, 24/7 online videos, transcripts, and exams. You can learn more about our ICD-10-PCS course at www.cco.us/PCS.